They say some voices are too pure for this world, as if heaven calls them back before the industry gets its chance to ruin them. In 1987, a young man from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania released one album that sounded like silk wrapped around sorrow, like gospel meeting heartbreak in a smoky studio at midnight. Picture this: a baritone so rich it could make you remember loves you never had. A vocal control so precise it felt effortless. A soul so exposed in every note that listening felt like eavesdropping on a prayer. His name was John White, and his voice, that rich, soulful, Johnny Gill-style instrument, should have made him a household name, should have put him on stages next to Luther Vandross and Freddie Jackson, should have earned him Grammy nominations and sold-out tours. But John White's story didn't end with stadium tours or platinum plaques. It didn't end with the success everyone predicted after they heard that demo. It ended on a cold December night in 1994, 7 years after his only album dropped, when a car accident in Hershey took him from this world at just 33 years old. One album, one charting single, one tragically short life. If you love uncovering hidden legends like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Legends Underrated, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Before the studio sessions, before the record deal, before anyone knew his name outside Pennsylvania, there was church. Always church. John W. White Jr. was born on September 30th, 1961, in Harrisburg, a working-class city along the Susquehanna River, where gospel music wasn't just Sunday morning tradition. It was survival, identity, and the language of hope. Picture those Sunday mornings, the smell of fried chicken wafting from the church basement, the sound of an organ warming up, the rustle of Sunday dresses and the shine of polished shoes on wooden pews. And then, that voice. His family sang, not casually, not occasionally. They sang like their souls depended on it, because in many ways, they did. In black churches across Pennsylvania, music was medicine. It was testimony. It was the way you processed joy and grief and everything in between. John grew up immersed in the sound of worship, in the call and response rhythms that would later bleed into every note he ever recorded. He learned to feel music before he learned to read it. He learned that a held note could carry more meaning than 1,000 words. By the time he was a teenager, John White wasn't just another voice in the choir, he was the voice people turned around to hear. Clear, powerful, drenched in emotion, he could make Amazing Grace sound like a love letter written to someone you lost. He could make grown men cry with a single held note, their handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes they didn't know were tearing up. Friends said he was shy off stage, almost painfully quiet, but put him in front of a congregation and something divine took over. He'd sing in the bathroom at home, and before long, neighbors would gather outside the window just to listen. His cousin, Scott White, sang too, and the two of them dreamed of something bigger than Sunday services. But in 1985, John was still unknown beyond his hometown. He worked, he sang, he waited, and then everything changed. Enter Rahni Song, a producer, multi-instrumentalist, and sonic architect who'd been crafting hits for years. His credits read like a who's who of 80s R&B, work with Melba Moore, instrumental genius Najee, the smooth harmonies of Ray Goodman and Brown. Ronnie wasn't just good at his job, he was obsessed with finding raw talent, with discovering voices that hadn't been polished into industry blandness yet. Voices that still carried church dirt under their fingernails. Voices that sang like they had something to prove to God himself. And in 1985, fate brought him to Harrisburg. Some stories say he was producing tracks in Pennsylvania. Others say he was scouting for session singers. Either way, on one particular Sunday morning, Rahni Song walked into a church service and heard John White sing, and everything stopped. It wasn't just the tone though, the tone was immaculate, a baritone that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient and holy. It was the ache beneath it. The way John could take a hymn and make it feel like a confession whispered in the dark. The way emotion lived in every syllable, every breath, every moment of silence between phrases. Rahni had heard thousands of singers, church singers, studio singers, wannabes and has-beens, but this was different. This was the real thing. After the service, Rahni approached him. The congregation was filing out, shaking hands, making plans for Sunday dinner. John was packing up sheet music when this stranger in expensive clothes walked up with a business card. "How would you feel about coming to New York to do some background sessions?" John, 24 years old and still working a regular job to make ends meet, thought it was a dream, maybe a joke, maybe one of those industry predators who promised the moon and delivered nothing but disappointment. But something in Rahni's eyes was serious, genuine. Within weeks, John White was on a train to Manhattan, watching Pennsylvania farmland give way to New Jersey industrial zones, then the jagged skyline of the city. He walked into studios that smelled like cigarette smoke and ambition. He stood behind microphones that had captured legends. He sang backgrounds on tracks for Melba Moore Tony Award winner, Grammy nominee, the woman with that scale-defying voice. He harmonized with parts for Najee, whose saxophone was redefining smooth jazz. He added texture to Ray Goodman and Brown's sophisticated soul, and he was grateful. God, was he grateful. This was more than he'd ever dreamed sitting in that Harrisburg church. He thought he'd be a background singer for years. That's how it worked, right? You pay your dues in the shadows. You wait your turn. You hope someone notices the way you can hold a harmony, the way you can blend without disappearing. But destiny moves faster for some, and John White's voice wasn't made for shadows. John was grateful just to be in the room, just to be singing on real sessions, hearing his voice layered into professional recordings, watching engineers tweak levels and producers nod approval. This was the dream. Not stardom, just this. Just making music that mattered. Then one afternoon, Rahni Song pulled him aside. "I need you to sing a demo for Freddie Jackson." The words hung in the air like smoke. Freddie Jackson, the smooth, chart-topping R&B king whose voice was silk and thunder combined. The man behind Rock Me Tonight and You Are My Lady. The artist whose face was on magazines and whose voice dominated slow jam radio. Rahni was producing a track called My Forbidden Love, and he needed a strong voice to lay down the demo. Not the final version, Freddie would record that himself, but a template, a blueprint to show what the song could be. John walked into the booth, headphones on, heart hammering against his ribs, nervous as hell, terrified of disappointing the man who'd given him this chance. He closed his eyes, thought about church, about those Sunday mornings when he sang like nobody was watching, about the feeling of letting go and trusting that the music would catch you. And then he sang like his life depended on it, poured everything into those 4 minutes, every ache he'd ever felt, every prayer he'd ever whispered, every dream he'd carried from Harrisburg to New York. When the track played back, the room went silent. That heavy, pregnant silence where everyone knows something extraordinary just happened, but nobody wants to be the first to say it. Then, someone from Hush Productions, the management powerhouse, behind Melba Moore, Freddie Jackson, and other R&B royalty, leaned forward in their chair, eyes fixed on the speakers. Who is this? Not who sang this. Not who's the demo artist, but who is this? Like John had just announced himself as someone the world needed to know. Rahni smiled, that knowing smile of a man who just discovered gold. That's John White. The executive's next words changed everything. Where can we sign him? Within days, John had a record deal. Not a background contract. Not a maybe someday promise. Not some vague development deal where the label could shelve him indefinitely while they figured out what to do with him. A real, legitimate recording contract with Geffen Records, home to Guns N' Roses, Cher, Whitesnake, and some of the biggest names in music, one of the most powerful labels in the game. David Geffen's empire. He was 25 years old. He'd been in New York for less than a year. He'd gone from singing in church choirs to signing contracts in Manhattan offices with lawyers and A&R executives, and suddenly, urgently, he was making an album. The speed of it stunned him, thrilled him, terrified him. One moment he's singing in a church bathroom in Harrisburg while neighbors gather outside the window to listen. The next, he's laying down vocals for his debut LP in professional studios, choosing takes, discussing arrangements, living inside the music industry machine. The album was called Night People, and Rahni Song produced every track with obsessive, meticulous precision. Rahni didn't just produce, he played almost everything himself, building the sound from the ground up, keyboards in every flavor, electric piano, synthesizer, organ textures, bass lines that grooved and pulsed beneath everything, drums and drum machine programming that gave the album that quintessential late 80s sound, polished but soulful, electronic but warm, modern but rooted in tradition. He layered synthesizers the way painters layer colors, textured the sound until it breathed, brought in saxophonist Najee to add those silky, sensual solos that made the album shimmer and sway. The studio became John's world. Late nights, coffee and takeout, vocal take after vocal take until they found the perfect blend of control and emotion. Rahni was a perfectionist, but he knew what he had in John White. He knew that voice deserved the best production possible. John co-wrote 2 songs, finding his voice not just as a performer but as a writer, learning the craft of song construction from Rahni. And he penned Mood for Love entirely by himself, a ballad that showcased not just his voice, but his understanding of structure, melody, emotional pacing, how to build tension and release, how to make a listener lean in closer, how to create space for vulnerability. He poured his church roots into every vocal take, blending gospel phrasing with R&B sensuality in ways that felt natural, unforced. Those runs and riffs he'd learned singing hymns, now decorated love songs. That emotional rawness that worked in testimony, now worked in seduction. The breath control from years of singing without microphones now translated into studio precision. The album was him, refined but real, polished but still carrying that church dirt under his fingernails. And then came the hard part. The part where the music leaves the studio and meets the cold, brutal world of the music industry. The first single, Victim, dropped and it barely made a dent in the charts, barely registered on radio playlists. The title track, Night People, followed with its up-tempo groove and catchy hook, same crushing result. Radio silence. Literally. Radio was brutal in 1987. Stations played what the labels paid for, and Geffen's promotional budget for John White wasn't massive. Program directors had their playlists locked down months in advance. Small budget releases from new artists got buried under Whitney Houston's powerhouse vocals, Michael Jackson's unstoppable momentum, Anita Baker's sophisticated soul, and the R&B giants who dominated airwaves with massive promotional machines behind them. Artists with established fan bases, artists with proven track records, artists who filled seats and sold millions. John White, One unknown kid from Pennsylvania with one small album budget and no name recognition. The industry barely noticed. DJs didn't add his records. MTV didn't play his videos if he even had the budget to make proper videos. Radio consultants passed him over for safer bets. But then came Can't Get You Out of My System, a soul ballad written by Rahni Song with surgical precision. Every chord change calculated for maximum emotional impact. Every lyric designed to resonate. A turn up the volume, Johnny Gill-style powerhouse that showcased everything John White could do. The runs that spiraled upward like prayers. The ache in his lower register that felt like confession. The control that let him whisper one moment and belt the next without ever losing the thread of the story. This was the one, the single climb. Not explosively like a Whitney Houston record, not fast like a dance track catching fire, but steady, persistent, like water carving stone. It peaked at number 27 on Billboard's Hot Black Singles chart, 13 weeks on the chart. Not a massive hit, not a number one, but enough to get attention, especially across the Atlantic in the UK, where soul fans had always been more adventurous, more willing to embrace new voices before America caught on. British soul stations put it in rotation. UK music magazines reviewed the album favorably. Critics praised the work. They called John White a talent to watch, a voice that belonged in the same conversation as the greats. They compared him to Freddie Jackson's smoothness, Luther Vandross's emotional depth, the great voices of the era. Some said he had the potential to be even bigger if given the right material, the right promotion, the right opportunity. In interviews, and there were few, because labels didn't invest in promotional tours for artists with modest chart performance, John was humble, almost disbelieving of his own success. "I'm very shy," he admitted in one rare sit-down with a soul music journalist. "I never imagined any of this, but I'm excited about what's next. I'm ready to work." He talked about touring with Melba Moore and Najee the following year, about plans that his management team was putting together. He said he wanted to work with Stevie Wonder someday, to learn from a master with Anita Baker, whose sophistication he admired. He even joked, with that church boy charm, that he'd love to duet with Dolly Parton, mixing gospel soul with country in a way nobody expected. At 26 years old, John White had one album, one charting single, and a whole future ahead of him. Or so he thought. Stories like these are why I built Legends Underrated. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more untold legends. For a fleeting window, his name circulated in R&B circles, UK soul fans. Always ahead of the curve, always more willing to dig deeper into catalogs, championed him like a secret they'd discovered. Mood for Love got airplay on selective soul stations that prided themselves on finding quality over commercial appeal. Vinyl collectors scooped up copies of Night People, recognizing the production quality, the vocal talent, the potential for future value. John performed where he could. He did promotional trips across the states, appearing at record stores, doing meet and greets, singing a couple of snippets for small crowds. He soaked in every moment, grateful to finally be living the dream he'd sung about in church all those years. Grateful that people somewhere were hearing his voice. But here's the brutal, unspoken truth about the music industry in the late 80s. If your first album didn't go platinum, if you didn't deliver massive sales numbers that justified the investment, the label moved on. Fast. Geffen Records had bigger fish to fry, new artists to develop, safer bets to promote, established acts that needed attention. John White's moment was too brief, too quiet. His sales numbers didn't justify a second album budget. His chart performance didn't scream future superstar. And so the phone stopped ringing. There was no second album, no follow-up single, no tour with Melba Moore that he talked about so excitedly. No duets with Anita Baker or sessions with Stevie Wonder. Just silence. Industry silence. The kind that's deafening because nobody tells you it's happening. They just stop calling, stop returning messages, stop talking about next steps. And in that silence, John White faded from view. What happened to him between 1987 and 1994 is mostly a mystery wrapped in silence. Some say he tried to get another deal, shopping demos to smaller labels, hoping someone would give him a second chance. Others say he went back to his roots, back to church music, singing in choirs, mentoring younger singers in Pennsylvania who dreamed of their own escapes. Maybe he worked regular jobs to pay the bills. Maybe he sang at weddings and local events. Maybe he wondered every day what went wrong, why the dream evaporated so quickly. His cousin Scott White continued recording and had some moderate success in the late 80s, proof that the White family had talent running through its veins. But John's trail went cold. No interviews, no new music, no headlines, no follow-up stories in the music trades that had once called him a talent to watch. It's the cruelest part of this story, not that he failed, but that he was forgotten. Not because he lacked talent, but because the industry is designed to churn through voices like his and move on to the next thing. Because talent without commercial momentum is just another statistic, another name in the bargain bins. By the early 90s, Night People was out of print. The vinyl sat in dollar bins and estate sales. John White became a footnote, a whatever happened to question that nobody bothered to ask. And then, on December 5th, 1994, a car accident in Hershey, Pennsylvania took his life. The details are sparse. Injuries sustained in the crash. No other context. Just another tragedy on a cold winter night. John White died young, with one album to his name, a handful of memories from people who knew him, and a voice that deserves so much more. His grave is in Pennsylvania. His cousin Scott mourned him. Friends from the church in Harrisburg remembered the boy who sang in the bathroom. And the world moved on, as it always does. But here's the thing about great music, it doesn't stay buried. Decades later, something strange and beautiful happened. The internet, that great equalizer, brought John White back to life. Night People was remastered and made available on streaming platforms. YouTube uploaders shared tracks. Vinyl collectors posted about finding the album in thrift stores. Comments poured in. Why wasn't this man famous? This sounds like Johnny Gill's lost brother. How did I never hear of him? In 2025, Soul Tracks featured Can't Get You Out of My System as a lost gem, calling it a turn up the volume soul ballad that still sounds strong decades later. New fans discovered John White through algorithms, through recommended tracks, through the strange magic of digital resurrection. People who weren't even born when he died now stream his music, moved by a voice they'll never hear live, touched by a story they're learning 30 years too late. There's something haunting about that, about the way his voice survived him, about how the world finally paid attention after he was gone. A friend once commented on a tribute video, "Very good friend of mine and a very good singer. Miss him with all my heart while he sings for the Lord. God bless you, Johnny." That's what we're left with. Not stadium tours, not platinum records, not the legacy he deserved. Just one perfect album, a voice that cuts through time, and the knowledge that somewhere in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there's a church where a young man once sang in the bathroom while neighbors gathered outside to listen. This twist shocked the world, and if you never want to miss stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to Legends Underrated, and don't forget to like the video if this story moved you. John White's story is a reminder that talent alone is never enough. Timing matters, luck matters, The machinery of the industry matters, but so does this. When you sing with your whole soul, when you pour everything into your art, it leaves a mark. It survives. It finds its way to people who need to hear it. Even decades later, some voices fade, some disappear into the static of history, but John White's voice, rich, aching, wrapped in gospel and heartbreak, still hums beneath the noise, still reaches across the years, still reminds us that greatness doesn't always get its moment in the spotlight. Sometimes it gets one album, one charting single, one chance to be heard, and sometimes that has to be enough. If you play Can't Get You Out of My System today, you'll hear what they heard in that demo session back in 1985. You'll hear why Hush Productions signed him on the spot. You'll hear the same thing Rahni Song heard in that church in Harrisburg, a voice that was meant for so much more. John W. White Jr., born September 30th, 1961, died December 5th, 1994. One album, one life, one voice that refused to be forgotten.